Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we all agree this is a dangerous budget. I believe America is a great nation, but this is not the budget of a great nation. This is not, great nations don't withdraw from the world. And if we just look at our history post-World War II in the second half of the 20th century, the three pillars that you talked about, defense, diplomacy, and development, created a better world. And Ms. Pletka, in your opening comments, you said a world led by the United States is a better world. I absolutely agree with that. And I think most of the world would agree with that. But the problem with this budget is it is not a budget that shows American leadership. And the problem is if we withdraw from the world, other nations are going to fill that void. And they won't necessarily share the values that we share. Again, this is a dangerous budget. On both sides of the aisle, we understand the vacuum that this would create. Listening to our defense experts, our Secretary of Defense, our retired generals, they think this would be a mistake. And again, that's the danger of this budget. It disturbs me that, this is my 5th year in Congress, and and it's my 5th year on the Foreign Affairs Committee. When we discuss the State Department budget, we have the Secretary of State doing the courtesy of sitting there and defending that budget. The fact that we don't have any State Department employee, let alone the Secretary of State, willing to defend this budget, I hope he does come before this committee so we can ask him questions directly. I think we as members of Congress ought to be offended by that. Look, we want to work with the administration. We want to maintain the strength of the United States. And we're a great nation, but we need a budget that reflects who we are, not just soft power, but the moral power of who we are as the United States. And that is not this budget, and that's the danger here. Yes, every department across this government could use evaluation, and they should, on an ongoing basis, evaluate each program, look for efficiencies, look for ways to return money to the taxpayer, or outdated programs should be phased out. Nobody's going to argue with that, and that should be an ongoing responsibility of Congress, but also the heads of those departments. But again, doing things in a haphazard way, as Secretary Mattis said, if we don't fund the State Department, then you're going to have to fund the military, and that is exactly what this budget does, and I think that is a dangerous mistake. Ambassador Burns, if you looked at this, and I'll continue with Mr. McCall's line of questioning. We've had multiple hearings on ISIS and how best to combat it. Yes, we have to fight them over there, but there clearly is a role of the State Department in countering some of the propaganda, in using our broadcasting powers, working to use the internet and social media in different ways, and working hand in hand with our diplomacy. And I believe this budget makes us more susceptible to threats here in the homeland, makes us more susceptible to not defeating ISIS. And I'd be curious about your thoughts there.
I would just say I agree with Danielle Pletka when she said that the terrorism problem is worse than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And so as we look ahead and we have to plan budgets with policy, we're facing another generation of a struggle against Islamic terrorist groups, Muslim terrorist groups in the Middle East and in Africa. And you also inferred this, we're competing with China for influence in East Asia. We're competing with Russia in Eastern Europe. We are the great power, and we don't want China and Russia to be in the ascendancy, and we want to be effective and successful in the war against these groups. You need to be active and in fifth gear, and that means fully funding state and AID as well as the military.
And I believe the rest of the world would prefer a world led by American values as opposed to the other ideologies. Ambassador Burns, you were a career diplomat. I don't know if you were at State post the Afghanistan conflict initially when we defeated the Russians, but what did we do? Did we stay there? Did we help rebuild Afghanistan? And what filled that vacuum?
Well, way back, we actually left Afghanistan.
And what happened in the aftermath?
Well, then al-Qaeda took root, and the Taliban made a partnership with al-Qaeda. So that was the big strategic mistake of the 1980s and 1990s leading up to 9/11. We left.
Well, let's make sure we don't make that same mistake.
Lois Frankel of Florida.